Today, we are diving into one of the most insane engineering concepts of World War II. We're talking about a weapon so enormous, it wasn't really a tank. It was basically a land battleship. This is the incredible story of Germany's P.1000 Ratte and a little trip into an alternate history of what might have been. And yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? What if this absolute behemoth of steel had actually rolled out onto the battlefields of Europe? Could it have actually changed the course of the war? Well, let's find out. To really get why anyone would even dream this thing up, you have to understand the nightmare they were living through. Our story kicks off on the brutal Eastern Front in 1943. This was a time when the arms race in tank design was just escalating like crazy. I mean, picture it. The battlefield was literally a frozen graveyard of steel. Germany had these technologically superior tanks, the Panthers and the Tigers, but they were almost always outnumbered by these huge swarms of Soviet T-34s. Germany needed a game changer, something that could dominate through sheer terror and firepower alone. And this desperation led some German engineers to think bigger. I mean, much bigger. They came up with this concept of the Landkreuzer, which literally means land cruiser. And look, these weren't just tanks. They were designed to be mobile fortresses. And the most extreme, the absolute peak of this idea, was the P.1000 Ratte. Now here's the crazy part. The blueprint for this absolutely absurd machine actually made it to Hitler's desk, and he gave it the green light. The only reason it was stopped was because his own armaments minister, Albert Speer, saw it for what it was, a total fantasy that would just drain Germany of men and material it desperately needed for, things that might actually work. But you know what? For the sake of our story, let's just push Speer's common sense aside for a minute. Let's actually break down the anatomy of this monster, because the specs, they're almost hard to believe. Okay, first off, the weight. 1,000 tons. That is the weight of a naval destroyer, a ship, not a vehicle that's supposed to drive on land. And then you've got its length, 35 meters long. Again, we are way out of the realm of tanks here. We're talking about a true land battleship. And the armor plating, up to 360 millimeters thick. It was basically designed to be completely impenetrable to any anti-tank gun that existed at the time. And this table right here just shows you how insane the jump in scale was. I mean, comparing the Ratte to a standard Panzer IV, which was a real workhorse for the German army, it's just staggering. 1,000 tons versus 25. 2 massive naval cannons versus 1 standard tank gun. A crew of up to 40 guys versus just 5. The Ratte wasn't just another tank, it was a whole different species of weapon. So we know it was never built in reality, but this is where we pivot. We're leaving historical fact behind, and we're stepping into our speculative timeline. Let's imagine a desperate Germany decides to take this absolutely insane gamble on steel. What if Albert Speer was just told to make it happen? What if, in a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of the war, the order was given to build this thing no matter what it cost? The effort would have been just monumental. You'd need a huge protected factory complex. They'd have to repurpose naval guns intended for battleships. The engines themselves would have been pulled from U-boats and somehow modified for use on land. And then, after months and months of this Herculean effort, 2 terrifying prototypes finally roll out of the smoke. And so, our alternate history begins. We're putting these brand new super tanks right on the front lines, ready to face the massive storm that is brewing. The scene is the Eastern Front, summer of 1944. The Soviet Union is about to launch Operation Bagration. Now, in our history, this was the massive offensive that completely shattered Germany's Army Group Center. But this time, as the Soviet tanks begin to pour forward, a shadow starts to emerge from behind a distant ridge. The ground itself starts to shake. The Ratte's twin naval cannons elevate and they fire. An entire Soviet armored column just disappears under a rain of high explosive steel. T-34s are shredded into scrap metal. Even the huge IS-2 heavy tanks are flipped over like they're just toys. The psychological shock is just as devastating as the physical destruction. And the result is pure chaos. Allied intelligence is just a complete mess. You can see from the reports it's mostly written off as propaganda or unconfirmed rumors, with just a tiny fraction being confirmed sightings. Nobody's really sure what they're up against, but everybody is terrified of this unkillable land fortress. But this is where our story takes a turn. Because behind the Ratte's stunning initial success, there was a fatal reality. This giant was a weapon that was doomed from the very beginning by its own design. This is the key paradox. Its greatest strength, those naval guns that could just vaporize targets from 20 kilometers away, was also its greatest weakness. Every single thunderous blast was basically a giant flare screaming, "I'm right here," to every Allied aircraft for miles around. And the problems just piled up from there. It was so heavy it couldn't cross any normal bridges. Its fuel consumption was absolutely catastrophic, crippling the very supply lines that were supposed to keep it running. It was visible for miles from the air, and it was way, way too slow to ever escape an attack. It was this unstoppable force that was also, tragically, an immovable target. And this is how it all ends. Allied pilots eventually spot the monster, probably parked somewhere trying to refuel. The smaller bombs from their fighter bombers, they just bounce right off that thick armor. But then, the heavy bombers arrive. A 2,000-pound armor-piercing bomb finds its mark, punching right through to the engine compartment. The giant is crippled. And then the next waves of bombers come in to finish the job. So what's the final verdict? Well, for all of its sound and fury, for all the immense resources poured into creating it, the Ratte was a colossal failure. Sure, it might have delayed defeat by a few days in one tiny sector of the front, but it couldn't change the outcome of the war. It was a spectacular and very expensive waste. And that leaves us with one last thought. The Ratte was a weapon designed to intimidate and dominate the entire world, but it was doomed by the simple, boring realities of that same world, by things like bridges, fuel, and even gravity itself. So what does that really tell us about the endless battle between sheer brute force and smart, practical strategy?